Well, I said I was going to be in Karana, but I'm not yet because I took a shower. And as often happens when taking a shower, you have many, many excellent ideas. And it would be a shame not to get those out on paper. Well, get those out of your head and down recorded somewhere. So, I was thinking about, I don't know how I got to this part, but I ended up thinking about consciousness. So I wanted to go to the plains of Karana and run around on a very bland, almost featureless landscape, kiting, slowly killing monsters, and I thought the perfect topic of discussion and thought at that moment would be consciousness, rumination, meditation on the concept of consciousness. As it happens, I am reading a book at the moment. It's by an author, Sam Harris. You may have heard of him. He's in the news. He's political. He's talking about the Middle East, things like that. And he comes at it from a perspective of anti-theism, or rather atheism, I suppose. No, anti-theism. So, and one of the reasons he talks about things of this nature is because his background is in neuroscience. He's getting his PhD, or already has, in studies of the brain, specifically regarding belief was his topic. I read another author, another neuroscience, doing roughly the same thing. On she was doing it on Brandon Randall. Is this who that was? Maybe something like that. On willpower. Quite interesting. Absolutely fascinating. In fact, no, sorry, Kelly McGonigal. Yeah. Evidently, her sister is rather famous in the gaming world, which is quite interesting. So, onward to. So one of the examples he gives. Oh, so he writes a book. The reason he writes this book is because, wow, despite the fact that atheists believe in no deities, they are still capable of being spiritual people. You've probably heard the phrase spiritual but not religious. Well, what does that mean? What does that even? What are you if you're not religious? What are you if you are spiritual? And so he breaks it down, and in the end, it has something to do with consciousness. Now, everything has something to do with consciousness. If, by definition, if you have a box, and in that box is something that has no relation to consciousness, never has and never will affect any consciousness in any way, then by definition, you have something that is of no moral use, no interest at all whatsoever, right? Because it can never affect any conscious creature in any way. All it can do is burn a rock, right? Wouldn't matter at all, ever. Kind of forgot where I was going with that. So he writes the book, and it is a guide to what spirituality, say, is, what it means, and if you want those feelings, how to get them, what they are, and how to separate them specifically from any religious thoughts. And I think I've broken it down. One of the main threads connecting all expressions of spiritual feeling. Anytime someone says, I felt a spiritual experience, what they mean is, ultimately, I felt different from just myself. The thing that is myself realized that it has numerous deep connections to other things that exist. whether those things are another person, objects, nothingness, right? You don't feel connected to anything, but you don't feel like you're a self at all. These things, this is what makes a feeling of spirituality feel spiritual. What the? There's Karana teasing me with its distance. So, a breakdown in your sense of being a thing that is you. And as I mentioned, that can come through a connection with other things, or that can come through a simple disillusion of the feeling of being something. Feel like you're nothing, feel like you just are the things around you, or you are everything, you are one. And anyone who's been on any kind of acid trip or anything like that will understand immediately what I'm talking about. You have connections to things that are objects, right? Or ideas, or there's no word for it, right? So you get a lot of that. Okay, so what he does in this book, what he talks about a lot in the book to work up to this is self, the concept of a self. What do we mean when we say this thing is me and this other thing is not me? Well, unfortunately, as the book points out, the self is an illusion. The thing that is you actually being a thing is wrong. You are not in any case, in any sense, a thing. So in other words, there is nothing that is you. So, okay, so to explain this, I don't know which one I want to start with first, my own analogy or the book's analogy. Let's start with my own analogy first, because my own analogy is far less cogent, coherent, clear, etc. So my own analogy would be this. I understand now why consciousness is referred to as a river. Quite interesting little way to figure that out. People refer to it as a river, and there's a reason they do. The reason is that, okay, the reason is encapsulated in this analogy. So here we go. There is a river flowing through a landscape. So picture the river, and now picture the parts of the river. There is the tube, the three-dimensional tube of water extending the length of the river. And there is the bed upon which that tube rests. Ignore the rest of it. Ignore the outside land, ignore the trees, ignore the air above it. Just pay attention to the tube of water, the three-dimensional shape of the water, and the three-dimensional shape of the bed. So the bed is made up of rocks, right? It's got a convoluted three-dimensional shape, and the water adheres to that shape. It folds and molds itself around that shape. So in the analogy, this is the reason it's called a stream. The consciousness is the water. The consciousness is a three-dimensional structure of the water. And reality is the three-dimensional structure of the riverbed. So, first thing to notice about that is that if the riverbed shape changes, so will the shape of the river. Giant fire beetle eye. I wonder if that works for my spell. Okay, so to get to the meat of the analogy, first thing to notice is that the three-dimensional shape of the riverbed changes the consciousness, right? So the water, one slice of water, first exists at this piece of the riverbed, in which case it is shaped like this. And then it moves down to another piece of the riverbed, and now it's shaped differently. So in other words, your consciousness experiences, it feels like a self at this moment when your brain is in this shape, and then it feels like a self later when your brain is in an entirely different shape. Now your brain is entirely different. Your brain is not the same thing in this instance of the river and at this instance of the river. Totally different three-dimensional shapes. In other words, if you have a memory in your brain, that memory is comprised of electrical signals that extend spatially, right? They fire in a pattern of neurons that is has a three-dimensional spatial extent and a four-dimensional spatial extent. So you have to, unfortunately, you have to make that go 4D. So a memory, when I say the word memory, you experiencing a memory, what you are experiencing is a four-dimensional shape, right? But that doesn't make sense to say that because you are not experiencing it. You are the memory. Whatever it is that is, I've gotten off track there. So anyway. Okay, I think I'm back on track. Okay, so the takeaway from that example is that the water takes on, in other words, experiences, in other words, feels like you. It feels like you in whatever shape the physical reality, the riverbed, forces it into. And it doesn't... Okay, so the riverbed analogy shows us that physical reality creates the I that your consciousness feels like. It doesn't matter what consciousness is present at that location at any one time. Because whatever consciousness is there at that slice of the riverbed, whatever consciousness feels the specific physical memory, whatever consciousness feels that, it will feel like that's you. It will feel like I. Like a thing. Okay, so moving on to the example in the book. You're living 100 years in the future, and we've discovered the nature of teleportation. We have the technology to do it. You realize your friends have taken several trips to Mars, teleporting there and coming back, and you have been left out. You haven't done it yet. So you head on down to the area. Sorry to spoil the book. If you want to read the book, don't listen. So you head on down to the teleportation chamber. You pay your money. You get in the chamber, and you see a button. If you push the button, you know this. You read on the wall. Here's the process. Here's how it works. Okay, what they do is they copy you atom for atom. So in other words, your three-dimensional, four-dimensional memory, a time slice of your four-dimensional memory, in the other example, in the river example, is recreated atom for atom, electrical charge for electrical charge. The exact same three-dimensional structure at a time slice in time is recreated, atom for atom, on Mars. And then you are taken apart, atom for atom, deleted. So a couple of questions pop up. First one is, before they delete your copy on Earth, are there two yous? Obviously, we don't know the answer to this question, so everything from here on is speculation, right? So if you, the question it becomes, if you were created, atom for atom, a copy of you, would you feel like there are two eyes? Would the thing that feels like I have two selves? You know, would there, obviously there wouldn't be, because that would incorporate action at a distance, faster than light travel. The memories that feel like I, the memories that your I is, yourself is experiencing in oneself, would have to instantly transfer somewhere to be felt by you, because they're coming from two different places, two different physical locations. How did my conjuration and channeling go? Oh, gotcha. You don't even have to get attacked for your channeling to go up? Come on, buddy. Come on. Run, run, run. There you go. So, are there two selves in existence at any one time? That's contradictory. That's silly, right? Probably not likely. Is one of them dormant? So in other words, does the consciousness that currently fills your brain have an identity? And does that identity transfer to an exact physical copy of you somewhere in the universe? Well, that's kind of silly. You would have to imagine that there is a function searching the entire universe every second, every time an atom moves, in order to recreate, invest in the universe at some point a copy, a you into the copy of you, right? That'd be silly. No, the only thing that makes sense here is that consciousness is a stream. Consciousness can be bifurcated, can be split by something, and yet exist exactly the same structure in two different places at once. So the only thing to understand here, the only thing that to come out of that analogy is the teleportation, is that at that moment there are two different consciousnesses, as much as consciousness can be different. There is you, about to push the button and disseminate your atoms to the wind, dissolve yourself, and there is a brand new you on Mars who has all your memories, all of your everything is the exact physical structure as you. A brand new person just created, freshly created, but identical physically to you. So you realize, oh my God, my friends have all been duplicated. They've been destroyed and recreated multiple times. They're not the same people. Well, are they the same people? So here's the two different thoughts in consciousness here become continuity of psychology or continuity of experience. In other words, the data your sense collects and the physical reality of you continuing from moment to moment to moment makes you. Is that what makes you? Because if you teleport yourself, recreate yourself on Mars, then that three-dimensional construct is a different thing. It is not there is no continuity between you and it, even though it's an exact copy of you. It just got created. The atoms just got put together. The quantum fields, quantum entanglement fields just coalesced and hung together in your brain over that, whatever the hell, that's some new ideas. And it is not you. So you have broken continuity of experience. You have experienced something different. Specifically, you've experienced creation and destruction. Unfortunately, that doesn't work. Because if you think about it, in what sense are you the same physical thing that began listening to this video? You've, 10% of the atoms in your body have been replaced and changed and moved. The physical structures in your brain, the memories, are completely different than what they were when you began listening. You are, in every sense, a different, completely different physical being. In fact, every moment of walking around in a physical existence is the exact same as being instantly destroyed and instantly recreated physically. So, not only is teleporting not bad, but teleporting is the exact same as existing. Basically, in every moment, you can consider yourself to be being broken down and rebuilt every instant. It's the same. I wonder if So there is no. So the continuity of physical experience is an illusion, right? And this is kind of pointed out by the fact that if we create something with memory, it didn't exist in the past. That doesn't even make sense, right? So you can create something that felt as if it just got created, and it will feel like it had a past, but in reality it just became in existence. I forget how that related to it. So what about continuity of psychology? In other words, the consciousness that feels like it's I has to be contiguous from one moment to the next in order to remain the same I. Well, we can easily break this one, unfortunately, as well. So, say I, made a copy of you. Yeah. So say this evening when you went to bed, the physical you existed in your bed. But the physical you, when it woke up, was now the physical me. Atom for atom, memory for memory. Remember, atom for atom recreates all the memories. You have every memory, every sense, every emotion that I have ever had exactly the same as me. So you wake up as me. The consciousness that fills your head, the consciousness that experiences the three-dimensional reality, four-dimensional reality of your physical being, the consciousness that experiences that as being I, is now experiencing my physical reality, four-dimensional physical reality. Would you feel, what part of you would feel strange? Right? Anything you feel is by definition an emotion or a thought. You don't feel yourself. You feel like a self, but you don't feel yourself. Oh shit, I hope the guards didn't get that. No, we're good. They go slow. So, to break the continuity of psychology, yourself can experience being a self in any physical reality. Like a stream. It doesn't matter what piece of the stream bed the water fills at any given moment, that water feels as if it is in the shape of the stream bed. So, the river analogy, teleportation example. These two things both point out that the water, the consciousness, feels like I. It feels like the riverbed. The consciousness feels like your physical reality. The water takes the shape of the riverbed. So I suspect that meditation, spirituality, the loss of self, involves forcing the consciousness to realize that it is not the shape that it is in. Forcing the consciousness to realize that it could be any of the other things in physical reality. Any of the other structures in physical reality could feel like an I if consciousness were invested into it. Which is pointed out very starkly by the example of the teleportation. Any piece of you that gets recreated anywhere else instantly feels like an I. I forgot about that one. So this is where the streams diverge. What about when they converge? So one other quick example was the corpus callosum. Your brain is made of two hemispheres, both of which have independent four-dimensional structures of memory in each one, and yet you feel like only one self. Well, it turns out the corpus callosum is a gigantic bundle of nerves, which connects both hemispheres and makes you feel like you are the memory that pops up in one hemisphere and in the other. We know this because if you slice the corpus callosum, if you get in an accident and it gets sliced, or if you do it, interestingly, you can do this while awake. If you cut it in half, then the I that is you, the conscious memory, the conscious thought, does not experience things that happen on the other hemisphere. We see this in patients who lose one side of their brain, right, get it sliced, and now all of a sudden they know what a hammer is. They can recognize a hammer, they can use a hammer, they can point out a hammer among other tools, but they cannot bring to mind the word hammer. So the thought of hammer was in their left hemisphere, which is the words, I may have that backwards, but the concept of how it's used and what it is and its shape is stored in the right hemisphere. They are unconscious of the physical structure of the memory of the word hammer. They're not just unconscious of it, they are not it. They don't feel that memory. The I is not there. Maybe confused with bringing it to the vocal. Yeah, I wonder if that doesn't make sense. Anyway, so you can split that in half, and at that point, you have to ask yourself a question. It's a bit of an absurd question. Did consciousness choose one of the hemispheres to exist in? Or did we create two entities? Now, so there's two possibilities here. Either you lost consciousness emerging from one of the hemispheres, or two, you, the you that got control of the vocal cords, is different from the you that is in the other hemisphere. And those are the only two possibilities. So there are now essentially two people existing in your brain. There's one who can use the vocal cords and who can bring to mind the concept of a hammer, but not the word. And then there is a you who has no ability to communicate with the outside world whatsoever, and yet just as legitimately feels like an I, feels like a thing, but is unable to express it, and is unable to communicate in any way the word hammer to the other I in your head. We've created two people by doing that, just like we created two people by copying you, making an exact copy of you on Mars. But in no sense are those two people the same. In no sense are they the same consciousness. But what the... But as we pointed out earlier, even though they're not the same consciousness... Sorry, I'm getting wrapped up in using my cure poison here. I kind of lost what I was saying. Anyway. What, is that not a poison? Is that not a poison? I'm pretty sure that's a poison. It's a disease, isn't it? Oh, yeah. My bad. Huh. So, have we created two people, or have we split the brain, creating two entities, two physical entities, which are now filled with consciousness? So, I don't know whether I went to here if... Yeah, so I think the goal of meditation is, or spirituality, is to make your consciousness realize that it is not merely the container in which it is currently filling. The water is not the riverbed. It is not the shape of the riverbed. It is a thing that can take on any shape. Yeah, so This was a good place to do this. I didn't have to lose focus terribly often. I didn't have to, but I certainly did.